If you're enjoying what you're watching, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. This story is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are products of my imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual events, locales, or persons, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. Some of my work may contain mature themes. Viewer discretion is advised. Willow Creek was a town nestled between rolling hills and a gentle stream where life moved at a slower pace. The town square was the heart of the community, home to festivals, markets, and laughter. The annual pie baking contest was the highlight of the year. At its center were Police Chief Tom Hargrove and his wife Clara, steady, dependable, and beloved. Together, they embodied Willow Creek's spirit until an event would soon test everything they knew. Police Chief Tom Hargrove was the steady guardian of Willow Creek. With a graying mustache and a kind smile, he kept the peace in his small town, handling lost dogs and neighborly disputes with care. Tom believed true policing was about knowing people, not chasing criminals. He never imagined darkness could find its way into his quiet, sun-dappled kingdom. While Tom patrolled Willow Creek, his wife Clara ran the Reader's Nook, the town's cozy bookstore. Surrounded by mystery novels, Clara's sharp mind noticed details others missed. She listened to the town's secrets over tea, piecing together stories. Soon, her love of fiction would become Tom's greatest asset. On an October morning, thick fog blanketed Willow Creek, muffling every sound and turning the town ghostly. Suddenly, a scream shattered the silence, echoing from the old Carver farm. Young Billy Tanner, delivering bread and milk, stumbled upon something horrific inside the barn. He fled, breathless, to the town square, his terror spreading unease through the village. The fog now felt menacing. A darkness had arrived. Old Man Carver was not a beloved figure in Willow Creek. He was a recluse, a man who seemed to have been born with a sour disposition that had only fermented with age. He lived alone on his sprawling, run-down farm, his interactions with the townsfolk limited to gruff encounters at the general store, or curt nods on the rare occasions he came into the square. He was known for his quick temper and his even quicker tendency to hold a grudge. Children were warned not to trespass on his land, and adults knew better than to try and engage him in friendly conversation. His isolation was a wall he had built himself, brick by cantankerous brick, over many years. His property was a reflection of his personality, neglected and unwelcoming. The fences sagged, the fields were overgrown with weeds, and the paint on his farmhouse was peeling away like sunburnt skin. The only part of the farm that showed any sign of care was the large, sturdy barn. It was his sanctuary, the place where he spent most of his days, tending to his few animals and tinkering with old machinery. It was a place few had ever been invited into. Carver guarded his privacy with a fierce, almost paranoid intensity, making it clear that visitors were not welcome. His reclusiveness made him an enigma, a man everyone knew of, but no one truly knew at all. Now, inside that private sanctuary lay the man himself. The scene that had sent Billy Tanner screaming was one of brutal finality. Carver was sprawled in the center of the barn floor amidst a scattering of hay that was stained a dark, horrific crimson. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the cobweb-draped rafters above, a look of shocked surprise forever frozen on his face. The cause of his death was gruesomely apparent. A three-pronged pitchfork, an ordinary farm tool transformed into a deadly weapon, was embedded deep in his chest. The handle stood upright, a grim monument to the violence that had taken place in the quiet solitude of the barn. The air inside was thick with the coppery smell of blood, a scent that mingled sickeningly with the familiar barnyard odors of hay and manure. A broken lantern lay on its side near the body, its glass shattered, suggesting a struggle had occurred in the final moments of Carver's life. The scene was a stark and brutal intrusion into the peaceful narrative of Willow Creek. Murder was a foreign concept here, a dark fiction that had suddenly and horribly become reality. Old Man Carver, a man who had lived his life pushing others away, had met an end that was violent, intimate, and profoundly shocking. News of the murder spread through Willow Creek faster than a fire in a dry field. Billy Tanner's panicked report was the initial spark, and from there, the flames of rumor and fear were fanned by phone calls and hushed, wide-eyed conversations over garden fences. The initial disbelief quickly gave way to a palpable sense of dread that settled over the community like the morning fog. This wasn't a stolen pie or a lost dog. This was murder. The word itself felt ugly and alien on their tongues. It was a violation of the unspoken covenant that held their town together, the belief that they were safe, insulated from the horrors of the outside world. The usual morning bustle in the town square ground to a halt. Small groups of people gathered on street corners, their voices low and anxious, their faces clouded with worry. The bakery sold few pastries, and the cheerful bell above the door of the reader's nook remained silent for long stretches. Parents called their children inside, their usual freedom suddenly curtailed by a new, invisible threat. The very air seemed to have changed, charged with a nervous energy that was completely at odds with Willow Creek's placid nature. Every stranger was now viewed with suspicion, every shadow seemed to hold a potential menace. The town's innocence had been shattered. Chief Tom Hargrove felt the shift immediately as he drove toward the Carver farm, his jaw set grimly. The faces that turned to watch his patrol car pass were not filled with their usual friendly recognition, but with fear and a desperate plea for answers. He was their protector, the guardian of their peace, and that peace had been violently breached on his watch. He felt the weight of their collective fear settle onto his broad shoulders. This was not a problem he could solve with a kind word or a patient negotiation. This was a deep wound that would require more than a simple bandage to heal. The trust the town had placed in him for 20 years was now being put to the ultimate test. For the first time in decades, the residents of Willow Creek locked their doors in the middle of the day. They checked and rechecked the latches on their windows. The comfortable, easy trust that had defined their community had evaporated, replaced by a chilling uncertainty. Who could have done such a thing? The question hung in the air, unspoken but felt by everyone. The horrifying truth was that the killer was likely not a stranger. In a town as small and isolated as Willow Creek, the monster was almost certainly one of their own. A neighbor, a friend, a familiar face now hiding a terrible secret. As the initial shock began to subside, it was replaced by a wave of frantic speculation. In the absence of facts, gossip and old stories filled the void. The townsfolk, huddled in the diner and the general store, began to piece together their own theories, their whispers weaving a tapestry of suspicion. Suddenly, every grievance and argument involving Old Man Carver was recalled and magnified. People remembered his bitter dispute with the neighboring farmer over a water well. They recounted the time he had publicly threatened a salesman who had trespassed on his land. Every harsh word he had ever spoken was now re-examined as a potential motive for murder. The focus of the town's suspicion began to narrow onto those who had the most obvious reasons to wish Carver ill. His estranged nephew, Jed, was the first name to surface. It was common knowledge that Jed was set to inherit the farm, a valuable piece of land despite its rundown state. Whispers circulated that Jed was deeply in debt from bad investments and had recently been heard arguing with his uncle, demanding his inheritance early. The image of the greedy nephew, impatient for his fortune, was a classic trope, one that felt plausible, even comfortable, in its familiarity to a town grappling with an unthinkable crime. Then there was Maggie, the sharp-tongued owner of the local tavern, the Rusty Mug. Carver had been a patron, though not a pleasant one, and he had run up a considerable tab that he refused to pay. Maggie was not a woman to be trifled with, and several people had witnessed her heated confrontation with Carver just last week, where she had demanded her money. Her fiery temper was legendary in Willow Creek. Could a dispute over a few $100s have escalated into something so violent? The thought was unsettling, but in the new, fearful atmosphere of the town, no possibility seemed too remote. Another name that emerged from the whispers was that of Eliza, Carver's former housekeeper. She was a quiet, timid woman who had quit her job only a month ago. At the time, she had told friends that she simply couldn't bear Carver's foul temper and constant criticism any longer. Now a darker version of the story began to circulate. Some claimed that Carver had done more than criticize her, that he had threatened her when she tried to leave. Perhaps her fear had turned to rage. These first ripples of suspicion spread quickly, creating currents of distrust that pulled the close-knit community apart, turning neighbor against neighbor. Chief Tom Hargrove arrived at the Carver farm, greeted by a silent crowd and his anxious officer. The barn was cold and dim, the air thick with dread. Old Man Carver lay dead, a pitchfork in his chest. Tom steadied himself. This was no accident. For the first time, he was not just a peacekeeper, but a homicide investigator. Tom's careful search of the barn revealed subtle clues. The muddy ground outside showed no strange footprints, an absence that spoke volumes. Inside, a broken lantern and spilled oil hinted at a struggle. The doors weren't forced. The killer likely knew Carver or the barn well. Tom realized this was no random crime. The silent clues were all here. He just had to make them speak. Tom returned home exhausted, the day's grim events heavy on his mind. Clara poured him coffee, her eyes full of concern. He recounted the crime scene, the body, the pitchfork, the broken lantern. Clara's brow furrowed, her mind racing. "No footprints in the mud?" she asked. "That's the most interesting part, Tom. Check everyone's boots for mud or glass shards." Tom realized, as always, his investigation wouldn't be a solo effort. The next morning, Tom began the investigation, starting at the coroner's office. Dr. Evans confirmed Carver died from a pitchfork wound between 10 and midnight. Tom's suspect list was short: Jed, Maggie, and Eliza. Following Clara's advice, he asked Sam to collect their muddy boots. "Standard procedure," he said. The investigation had begun quietly, with a list of names and a strange request. Chief Hargrove's first interview was with Jed, Old Man Carver's only living relative. He found Jed in his cluttered apartment above the hardware store, looking haggard and anxious. Jed claimed he'd been fishing alone at Miller's Pond the night of the murder, but his alibi was impossible to confirm. When Tom asked for Jed's boots, a flicker of panic crossed his face. The seed of doubt was planted. Next on Tom's list was Maggie, the formidable owner of the Rusty Mug Tavern. He found her behind the bar, arms crossed, her expression hard. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her alibi was strong. She'd been behind the bar all night with plenty of witnesses. When Tom asked about Carver's debt, Maggie's anger flared, but her logic was sound. A dead man can't pay his tab, can he? Tom's last interview was with Eliza, Carver's former housekeeper. Her fear was genuine. She trembled, eyes red from crying, and claimed she'd been home alone, too scared to go out. Her story painted her as a victim, not a suspect. Tom left her cottage with sympathy, the secrets of Willow Creek still tightly held. While her husband conducted his official interviews, Clara Hargrove began her own, much quieter investigation. Her base of operations was the Reader's Nook, the town's unofficial clearinghouse for gossip and information. She knew that the truth of a small town often lay not in official statements given to the police, but in the half-whispers, overheard snippets, and casual remarks exchanged between neighbors. She put on a fresh pot of tea, arranged a plate of her lemon scones on the counter, and simply made herself available. She didn't need to ask direct questions. She just needed to listen with the practiced ear of a storyteller. Her first unofficial clue came from Mrs. Gable, who stopped in to buy a gardening magazine, but was clearly more interested in talking about the murder. While lamenting the town's lost innocence, she casually mentioned seeing Jed's truck parked down the lane from Carver's farm just a few days before the murder. "He tried to hide it behind that thicket of bushes," she whispered conspiratorially. "But I recognized the dent in the fender. I thought it was strange he was skulking around like that." This contradicted Jed's claim to Tom that he hadn't been near the place until the day of their argument, suggesting a degree of premeditation or stalking that was deeply unsettling. Later in the afternoon, Maggie's young barmaid, a girl named Lucy, came in looking for a romance novel. She was visibly shaken by the police presence at the tavern earlier. Seeking a sympathetic ear, she confided in Clara. She confirmed Maggie's alibi, stating that her boss had been at the tavern all night. But then she added a curious detail. "Maggie was in a foul mood all week though," Lucy said quietly. "Ever since she had a big row with Mr. Carver. She even threw a glass at him during one argument a while back." smashed against the wall right next to his head. This detail, while not directly related to the murder, reinforced Maggie's volatile temper and her capacity for sudden, physical rage. Clara absorbed these pieces of information, her mind fitting them into the larger puzzle. She thought about the suspects as characters in one of her novels. There was Jed, the greedy nephew, whose lies were already starting to unravel. There was Maggie, the hot-tempered creditor, whose public anger could be a cover for something darker, or perhaps just a red herring. And there was Eliza, the terrified victim, who seemed the least likely suspect, but, as any good mystery reader knows, it is often the one you least suspect. Clara felt the familiar thrill of the chase, the intellectual pursuit of the truth, and knew she couldn't leave it to Tom alone. Clara visited the Rusty Mug, pretending to discuss catering with Maggie but really searching for clues. She noticed a missing button on Maggie's coat, recalling Lucy's story about Maggie's argument with Carver. Later, Clara found a similar button in the crime scene photos. The evidence seemed damning, but Tom cautioned her. It could be a red herring. Clara realized the button alone didn't prove Maggie's guilt. The investigation grew more tangled, with truth and misdirection blurring together. The real answer remained hidden in the shadows of Willow Creek. The lab report on the suspect's boots was inconclusive. No mud matched the crime scene. But then, a breakthrough microscopic glass shards were found in Jed's jacket pocket. The glass matched the broken lantern from the barn. Jed's alibi unraveled. He couldn't have gotten the glass fishing miles away. For the first time, Tom had hard evidence linking a suspect to the murder scene. Jed became the primary suspect. The investigation narrowed, the hunt now focused. Clara obsessed over the button in the hay, convinced it implicated Maggie, but doubts crept in. Was it too obvious? She called Lucy, who revealed Maggie lost the button days before the murder, after a heated argument with Carver. The button was a red herring, not proof of guilt. Maggie's alibi held. Clara felt relief. The real killer was still out there. The puzzle's pieces shifted, false leads falling away. That night, Tom and Clara pieced together the evidence. Jed confronted Carver for money, a fight broke out in the barn. The lantern shattered, glass embedding in Jed's jacket. In the chaos, Carver fell onto the pitchfork. Jed panicked and fled, inventing a false alibi. The theory fit every clue. All that remained was to confront Jed with the truth. Tom brought Jed in, placing the bag of glass shards before him. Jed's composure crumbled. The evidence was undeniable. He confessed the fight, the shove, the accident. He hadn't meant to kill Carver, but panic drove him to lie. Tom listened, then arrested Jed. The case was closed. Willow Creek's secrets at last were brought to light. With Jed's confession, relief swept over Willow Creek. The fear that once gripped the town faded, replaced by closure and cautious hope. Neighbors exchanged warm smiles, children played outside, and daily life slowly returned. The police chief had restored not just the law, but faith in the safety of their small world. Willow Creek was quiet again. At last, the town could breathe. That evening, Tom and Clara sat together on their favorite porch swing. The gentle creak of its chains, a familiar and comforting rhythm in the cool night air. The last of the day's light faded from the sky, replaced by a canopy of stars that seemed to shine a little brighter now that the town's darkness had been resolved. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that only exists between two people who know each other completely. The case was over, the paperwork was filed, and all that remained was the quiet contemplation of the events that had unfolded. They had faced the unthinkable together, and their unique partnership had been the key to seeing it through. Tom finally broke the silence, his voice low and laced with a teasing affection. "You know," he said, turning to look at his wife, her profile illuminated by the soft glow from the living room window. "You're completely wasted on selling books, Clara. You missed your calling. You should have been a detective." He meant it as a joke, But there was a deep undercurrent of genuine admiration in his words. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he would have struggled to solve the case without her sharp mind, her intuitive leaps, and her uncanny ability to see the narrative hidden within the chaos of facts. Clara just smirked, a playful glint in her eyes. "And you, my dear chief," she retorted softly, "would be completely lost without me to read the instructions." Her words were light, but they held the profound truth of their relationship. He was the man of action, the steady hand of the law, but she was the strategist, the one who could read the hidden language of clues and human behavior. She found the path, and he walked it. She had no desire for a badge or a formal title. Her satisfaction came from the intellectual puzzle itself, from the quiet victory of bringing a hidden truth into the light. They sat for a while longer, swinging gently as the crickets began their nightly chorus. Willow Creek's first murder in a generation had been solved, not just by a police chief's grit and determination, but by the unlikely and powerful collaboration of a husband and wife, a man of facts and a woman of fiction. As the town settled into a peaceful slumber, reassured that justice had been served, its two quiet heroes sat on their porch, a silent testament to the idea that sometimes, the most effective detective duo is simply two people who love and understand each other, sharing a cup of coffee and unraveling secrets together. Thank you for watching.